So one of the questions I've been getting is, what is DePIN and why are we doing DePIN? So DePIN stands for decentralized, such a long word, physical infrastructure network. So that's DePIN. Lots of words. Why don't we walk through this a little bit? So we'll start with network. I always like to take these acronyms and start from the back. It's a network of computers. We'll start with that. Infrastructure. What kind of infrastructure are we talking about? Infrastructure can be anything from CPUs, GPUs, storage, network relays, any type of network service. Think about like what you can get from cloud infrastructure. If you look at cloud providers, AWS, Google Cloud Compute, or cloud platform, Azure, all of those places, those are cloud infrastructure companies, and they have their own infrastructure resources available. What we're saying here is that this network is a network of infrastructure resources. Physical infrastructure resources means that we're specifically limiting that infrastructure to things like storage, compute, GPU, network access, and stuff like that. And then the decentralized part is the part where we overlay this network of infrastructure, physical infrastructure, with some type of incentive model that ensures that these resources can be used appropriately and they're kind of optimized in their utilization. Okay, very cool. So if we look at the picture here and we think, I got all of these computers in this network of computers, think of this maybe in the gaming space. You've got all of these gamers' computers that are sitting on their desk. They might play their games for a few hours a day, but for maybe 20 to 22 hours a day, those computers are sitting there unused. If it's also your work computer, maybe you got a few more hours in there. But even in that case, if you got 8 hours of work and we'll say 4 hours of gaming because you're a hardcore gamer, that's 12 hours that your computer is not being used throughout the day. And I would consider that an underutilized resource. The question is, how can we tap into that underutilized resource and use it for various use cases in a way that is more cost effective than cloud infrastructure? And that's really the goal of DePIN. The goal of DePIN is, how do we coordinate and incentivize resources and match them with jobs that need those resources, and then have those job runners pay the resources in a way that incentivizes them for availability and completing the job successfully. So let's just take a real simple example here. In Tashi, we've got players that play in a game. So they set up their own little private network and they play in a game. Consensus is achieved between all of the players in the game. Now, in order to achieve consensus, we need at least 4 machines in the game itself. But what if you have a multiplayer game that has 2 players, or maybe you have 4 players and you want to have some type of like a surety that if 1 or 2 of the players fall out of the game, the consensus isn't going to freeze. So what you would do is you would backfill that game session with additional consensus nodes. So in here, say we took these 2 consensus nodes and said, we're going to assign these consensus nodes to this Tashi game session here. And these 2 nodes are going to participate in consensus. They're kind of like failover or backfill to ensure that that game is reliable. Because that's one of the questions we get with our fully on-DAG gaming model. The idea that all the players are the consensus nodes. If enough players fall out of the game, what happens to the multiplayer game? In some cases, you just want the multiplayer game to end. In some cases, you actually want it to keep going. And if that's the case, you need to go out and find other nodes to be consensus. Now, they're not going to be players in the game. They're just going to be supporting consensus. They're basically going to witness the players' moves and then calculate consensus, which is the order and timing of those moves in the game. So if we wanted to say that this game here is the job, it's basically saying I need somebody to fill this consensus job. And I've got all these resources down here that are able to fill that job. We need some way to match the job with the resources. And this is done in this kind of middle layer here, which we like to call the orchestration layer. Other people have different names for it, but we call it our orchestration layer. And in that orchestration layer, the job of the orchestration nodes is to keep track of which resource nodes are online and available, keep a reputation score for them so they know which resources are the most likely to satisfy the job or to complete the job. And then when that job comes in, they ingest that job queue and then match it with the appropriate resources. And then on the back end, validate that the job was completed successfully. And then finally, they compensate the actual resource nodes for a job well done. So that's how we kind of break down the DePIN, is we've got kind of like this orchestration layer that manages the queuing of jobs, the validation of the jobs, and then the compensation or rewarding of the resource nodes for those jobs. And then we've got this big decentralized network of resource nodes, which are just gamers' computers sitting around earning money for being available to satisfy jobs for other players' sessions. So if we kind of get a little more maybe concrete about an example. Suppose that I'm a gamer, I want to play this multiplayer game for 4 hours a day. Maybe it's a racing game, maybe it's a real-time strategy game. I'm playing this game, and when I log on, I play for my 4 hours, and I might have like a little wallet, like a game wallet with a balance. And as I'm playing, anytime I need to get a resource, my balance goes down a tiny bit to pay that resource to do the job that I'm asking them to do. Now, when I'm done with playing for 4 hours, I'm going to leave my machine on. And for the next 20 hours, that machine is going to become a resource node for other games. This is kind of the beauty of having like a game launcher that acts as your resource node and as your game launcher. That it can kind of queue itself up in the orchestration layer and say, hey, I'm available to be a consensus node or a relay proxy or a lobby node for any other game. And if anybody needs me, give me some money and schedule me up, right? So you go to bed, you go to work the next day, and you come back and you're ready to play again, and you look at your balance, and your balance is now higher than it was when you left the day before because your computer's been busy doing these jobs for various other use cases, game sessions that are going on, and now you can use that balance again to play your game. Now, that may be one model of it, that may be one incarnation of what that experience looks like, and that might fly just fine with Web 3 folks. Web 2 folks might get a little weirded out if they have this wallet with a balance that has to be at a certain amount to play the game. And this is where publishers and studios can get creative and how they participate in the DePIN infrastructure. My suspicion is a lot of them will cover the costs of those DePIN resources and jobs initially, the same way that they're currently covering all of the cloud infrastructure costs. They would also cover those costs in the DePIN model. And then as their players are earning additional rewards, they're also getting compensated for encouraging their players to leave their machines on. So there's a whole economic system, a whole token system here where potentially the DePIN revenue becomes a revenue stream for the publisher and studio. It also becomes a free resource for the players, so there's no additional friction for the players. And it becomes a way to compensate resource nodes in the grand scheme of things. Again, the whole point of this DePIN strategy is how do we take all these underutilized resources, make them more utilized, maximize their utilization, and then compensate. So overlay a compensation layer or a reward layer to ensure that those resources are available and successfully completing the jobs. That's the whole plan. We're basically taking what was normally done by cloud companies who hosted their own centralized resources, had their own business models, had centralized billing and finance, and we're figuring out, instead of buying new infrastructure, buying new resources and setting them up in data centers and paying it all to one company where the margins might be higher than they should be because they have to cover a lot of the business components of the commercials of their infrastructure. And we're taking all of that and we're figuring out how do we do that in a more efficient way using decentralized architecture with that kind of Web3 incentive overlay to ensure that availability and completion, successful completion of jobs. So that's a little bit about DePIN. Hopefully that helps you understand it a little bit better. If you have any more questions about it and how that fits into the Tashi message, feel free to join us in our Discord. Thanks for joining me. I'll have a few more of these videos coming out to explain various components of the Tashi architecture, some of the progress that we're making, some of the successes we're having, and a lot of the community building stuff, which is the part that I really enjoy. Thanks for joining me. We'll talk again soon. Cheers.